On my own birthday, my daughter-in-law handed my son an envelope. Inside, a vacation for the whole family, except me. She even told him not to waste money on old people. I stayed quiet, serving the cake like nothing happened. But weeks later, when she tried to unlock their house and found the locks changed, her scream shook the street. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. Margaret Coleman had lived 65 years on this earth, and though she carried the grace of experience, she never imagined that betrayal could still cut this deep. A widow for more than a decade, she had poured her devotion into her son Michael. Family gatherings had become her anchor, her sanctuary against the loneliness that sometimes pressed too hard against the silence of her home. That was why the birthday celebration planned for him meant so much. 38 was not a milestone year by anyone else's standards, but to her it was another precious reminder that she had raised a boy into a man worth honoring. The gift she chose carried the weight of memory. A vintage watch polished until its silver face gleamed had once belonged to Michael's grandfather. She had kept it safe, waiting for the right moment. His birthday felt perfect, a chance to remind him of the generations that came before, of the legacy that still pulsed through their blood. She wrapped it carefully, choosing dark blue paper and a ribbon tied with trembling fingers. On her counter, it sat like a promise, glowing against the dim light of her kitchen. On Tuesday morning, the phone rang. Margaret answered quickly, her heart lifting at the thought that it might be Michael. Instead, she heard the voice of her daughter-in-law, Vanessa. Sweet as sugar, too sweet. It was the kind of voice Vanessa used when preparing to slide a knife under silk. "Oh, Margaret, I'm so sorry to tell you this," she began. Words dipped in false sympathy. "Michael's birthday party this weekend. We had to cancel it. You know how it is with his work schedule." Margaret's chest tightened, her fingers gripping the phone until her knuckles whitened. Canceled? The words stung more than she expected. She had been counting down the days, imagining laughter spilling through the house, the warmth of family circling her table. "Cancel it?" she repeated softly, struggling to mask the disappointment breaking through her voice. "Is everything all right? Is Michael okay?" "Oh, he's fine," Vanessa replied quickly. Too quickly. "Just overwhelmed with work. You know how he gets. We'll do something small, just the three of us. Maybe next month we can plan something bigger." The explanation should have eased Margaret's worry, but instead it felt heavy with something unspoken. There was a tone beneath the words, a layer of dismissal that pressed on her heart. When the call ended, Margaret stayed at her kitchen table, staring at the wrapped gift. The silence of her house grew louder, pressing in from the walls. She decided to call Michael directly. Perhaps she could still take him to lunch, celebrate in some small way. But when she dialed his number, the call went straight to voicemail. She left a message, her voice careful, almost apologetic, as though she were intruding on his time. An hour later, she tried again. Still voicemail. By Thursday, there was no return call, no message, not even a simple text. Michael had never been careless with her before. Even at his busiest, he made time to answer her, to reassure her. The worry that had started as a faint chill now bloomed into a cold knot in her stomach. She walked the rooms of her house aimlessly, pausing at the counter to touch the gift, her hand lingering on the ribbon as though it could anchor her spinning thoughts. The days dragged, slow and heavy. She tried to distract herself with chores, polishing the silverware, folding linens she had already folded twice. Still, the silence remained, an unwelcome companion. Every creak of the house reminded her that she was alone, that the laughter she longed for was slipping further out of reach. On Friday evening, she found herself sitting in her favorite armchair, staring at the framed photographs that lined the mantel. Michael as a boy, his smile wide and carefree. Michael as a teenager, standing tall at his graduation. Michael on his wedding day, beaming at Vanessa. Each picture told the story of a bond that had always felt unbreakable. But now, with each unanswered call, with Vanessa's syrupy voice echoing in her mind, Margaret felt that bond begin to fray. The weight of unease pressed harder. She could not shake the sense that something was being hidden from her, something cruel wrapped in politeness. She whispered to herself as if confessing to the empty room, "Why do I feel like I'm being left behind?" The gift remained on the counter, its ribbon still perfectly tied. It mocked her in its readiness, a celebration that might never come. By Saturday morning, the unease had settled into Margaret's bones like a winter chill she couldn't shake. She stood at her kitchen window with a cup of tea growing cold in her hands, watching the gray light spread across her small yard. The garden she had tended faithfully looked dull without blooms, its colors muted, as though even the flowers' new celebration had been canceled. She set the cup down untouched. Her eyes drifted once more to the gift box on the counter, the ribbon still neatly tied. That simple package felt heavier with each passing day. No longer just a present, but a reminder of promises broken and doors closed. She had imagined handing it to her son with a smile. Imagine the way his eyes would soften when he recognized his grandfather's watch. Now it sat unopened, gathering dust, carrying silence instead of joy. Margaret picked up her phone again, scrolling through her contacts. Michael's name sat near the top. She pressed it, listening to the familiar ring, hoping against hope he would finally answer. But again, his voicemail greeted her, polite and distant. She ended the call quickly, unable to leave another message that would surely go unanswered. Her chest tightened with a weight she hadn't known in years. It wasn't just disappointment anymore. It was suspicion. Something wasn't right. Vanessa's words echoed in her memory. Too sweet, too careful. Margaret had been a mother long enough to hear when truth was being twisted, when kindness was nothing more than a curtain to hide behind. To distract herself, she walked through the house, dusting shelves already clean, straightening books that didn't need straightening. The photographs lining her hallway seemed to watch her with knowing eyes. Here was Michael at 10, proudly holding up a model airplane. Here he was at 18, his cap and gown bright against the summer sun. Here he was at 27, smiling at Vanessa on their wedding day. Margaret paused in front of that one. She remembered how her heart had swelled with pride and hope, believing her son had found someone who would treasure him as much as she did. Now, standing in the quiet hallway, she felt a shadow creep over that memory. Had she been blind? Had she mistaken charm for love, sweetness for sincerity? The doubt was sharper than she wanted to admit. By mid-afternoon, the house felt unbearable. Every corner hummed with silence, and every silence deepened her fear. She thought of driving over to Michael's home, of knocking on his door just to see him, to assure herself that everything was fine. But pride kept her rooted. If Vanessa wanted her excluded, showing up uninvited would only confirm every excuse she might give later. Margaret would not hand her that victory. Instead, she sat in her armchair by the living room window, a book open but unread in her lap. Outside, the world went on. Cars passed, neighbors walked their dogs. The sound of children playing floated faintly in the distance. Life continued as though nothing had shifted. Yet for Margaret, everything had. She felt like she was on the outside of her own family, watching through glass as the moments she cherished were stolen from her. Evening came, and with it a soft rain that tapped against the windows. Margaret let the sound wash over her, hoping it would ease the restless ache inside her chest. But the questions only multiplied. Why hadn't Michael called her back? Was he truly buried under work? Or was something else keeping him silent? And why had Vanessa's tone carried that subtle edge, that hint of satisfaction when she'd announced the party was canceled? She turned on the television for background noise, but the voices felt hollow, distant. Nothing filled the emptiness that pressed around her. She thought again of the watch, how her late husband had worn it on long days in the factory, how he had polished it with care before passing it down. That watch had carried history, sacrifice, love. Now it sat in wrapping paper like a secret waiting to be revealed. Margaret rose and placed the box back into her bedroom drawer, unwilling to see it any longer. As she closed the drawer, she whispered into the empty room, "You'll get this gift, Michael, one way or another." The house was quiet again, save for the patter of rain. She sat on the edge of her bed, hands folded in her lap. The unease that had started as a whisper had grown louder, filling every shadow. She felt certain now something was being kept from her, and soon she would find out what it was. The storm inside Margaret had been growing for days, and by Sunday afternoon it no longer felt like worry. It felt like betrayal sharpening its claws. She needed air, needed escape from the walls of her house that seemed to echo with silence. She grabbed her keys, slipped on a light coat, and drove without direction, letting the steady hum of the car soothe her restless thoughts. The streets were alive with color and motion. Families filled sidewalks, couples lingered at cafe tables, laughter spilled from open doors of restaurants. The ordinary beauty of it should have calmed her. Instead, it made the ache inside her more unbearable. Everyone else seemed to belong somewhere. Everyone else seemed included. She turned down Main Street, intending only to drive past the familiar shops, but the sight that struck her heart stopped her hands on the wheel. Through the glowing windows of a popular restaurant, she caught a flash of something that froze her blood. Balloons, bright ones, a cake being carried out by waiters, and at the center of it all, her son. Michael's face was radiant with joy, his laughter rising above the noise of the crowd gathered around him. He clapped his hands as his friends cheered, and at his side stood Vanessa, her smile as polished as glass. Margaret's breath hitched in her chest. The restaurant pulsed with celebration, music, warmth. Everything she had been told was canceled. Her car rolled to a slow stop across the street. She couldn't tear her eyes away. There were no signs of stress, no hint of exhaustion. Michael looked alive, happy, surrounded by people he loved. People, it seemed, who mattered more than she did. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to the steering wheel, fighting the sting in her eyes. Her son's 38th birthday party hadn't been canceled at all. She hadn't been forgotten by accident. She had been erased by design. Lifting her gaze, she saw Vanessa lean in close to Michael, whispering something that made him laugh harder. The sight cut Margaret deeper than she could bear. She had wanted to be there, wanted to hand him the gift, to see the watch slip onto his wrist. Instead, she sat in her car across the street, hidden in the shadows like an uninvited stranger. Her fingers trembled as she gripped the steering wheel. Memories collided in her mind. Michael at 10, running to her with scraped knees. Michael at 18, shaking her hand proudly at graduation. Michael on his wedding day, kissing her cheek with gratitude. Now he was 38, and she was on the outside looking in, no longer needed, no longer wanted. She swallowed hard, forcing her breath to steady. Pain threatened to unravel her, but beneath it rose something steadier. Resolve. This was not the end of her story. She would not sit quietly and let herself be erased. Vanessa's smug smile, Vanessa's control over the narrative, would not define Margaret's place in her son's life. She stayed a few more moments, watching as the cake was cut, as candles flickered, as Michael's friends cheered. And though it broke her heart to witness the celebration without her, it also gave her clarity. The truth was in front of her now, undeniable. She had been deceived. She had been betrayed. Margaret started the car again, pulling away from the restaurant. The night outside was cool, and the city lights blurred through the tears in her eyes. But her mind was sharper than ever. She was done with doubt. She was done with silence. Her lips curved into the faintest of smiles, though her heart ached. Vanessa believed she had succeeded in excluding her. Vanessa believed Margaret would fade quietly into the background. She was wrong, because Margaret had something Vanessa didn't: a lifetime of resilience and a mother's unshakable will. And when the moment came, she would return the cruelty with a surprise Vanessa would never forget. Stay with me, because what came next would change everything. And if this story grips your heart the way it has gripped mine, make sure to follow it, share it, and keep listening, because the storm that started here was only the beginning. The morning after witnessing her son's birthday celebration from the shadows, Margaret woke with a heaviness that clung to her bones. Sleep had come in fragments, restless and jagged, filled with flashes of laughter and candlelight she had only watched from a distance. The image of Michael's face, glowing with happiness, replayed again and again, each time cutting her deeper. She had not been mistaken. Vanessa had lied, deliberately carving her out of a moment that should have belonged to them all. Margaret sat at her kitchen table, staring at the faint light creeping in through the curtains. The house felt different now, lonelier, colder. The betrayal no longer hovered like suspicion. It had settled into fact. Her son had been stolen from her, and the thief wore a smile too sweet to be real. She pulled the drawer open and brought out her purse. Perhaps errands would distract her, if only for a little while. She shuffled through bills, receipts, the small notes she always kept for herself. Then, tucked between envelopes, she found the credit card statement she had ignored in her haze of disappointment. The envelope was heavier than usual. A tremor of unease traveled through her fingers as she tore it open. The numbers printed on the page made her breath stop. Nearly $5,000 charged in one night. Champagne, catering, floral arrangements, and a large payment to the very restaurant where she had seen Michael's party. Her vision blurred as the truth sank in. Vanessa hadn't only excluded her, she had stolen from her. The birthday she wasn't allowed to attend had been built with Margaret's money. Margaret pressed her hand to her mouth, a soundless cry rising in her throat. For a long moment, she could do nothing but sit there, staring at the page that had turned her sorrow into fury. She had worked carefully in her later years, saving what she could, living modestly so she wouldn't be a burden to anyone. $5,000 was not a careless sum. It was months of security, stolen with arrogant disregard. Her mind reeled back through small moments she had overlooked. Vanessa offering to help with bills. Vanessa borrowing the card once for groceries. Vanessa assuring her it was easier that way. Margaret had trusted, too eager to believe her son's wife could be family in truth, not just in name. Now that trust had been twisted into debt. She rose from the table, pacing the narrow kitchen as anger surged through her. This wasn't simply exclusion anymore. It was theft layered with cruelty. Margaret pictured Vanessa's polished smile at the party, the way she leaned into Michael's arm as though nothing in the world could touch her. The audacity of it, the sheer gall, ignited a fire in Margaret's chest. But beneath the anger lay something quieter, steadier. Resolve. She would not run to Michael with tears and accusations. Not yet. She would not give Vanessa the satisfaction of calling her hysterical or paranoid. No, if Vanessa thought she could erase her, she had underestimated the woman who had endured decades of hardship, who had raised a child alone, who had learned the strength of patience. Margaret gathered the statement, folded it carefully, and slipped it into a drawer beside the gift box that still waited. Both were symbols now, the watch of love and legacy, the statement of betrayal and theft. Together they told the story of what had been taken from her and what she intended to reclaim. She sat again, calmer now, the rage cooling into something sharper. Margaret knew that her silence had power. Vanessa believed she was invisible, harmless, irrelevant. That illusion would make her downfall all the more complete. When the time came, Margaret would not need to shout. The truth would do the work for her. The rest of the day moved slowly. Margaret carried on with ordinary tasks, laundry folded with precise hands, dinner cooked and left uneaten. But her mind never left the betrayal. Each plate she stacked, each drawer she closed, became part of the rhythm of her plan. She was preparing, gathering strength the way a storm gathers clouds. As evening settled in, Margaret sat by her window again, watching the streetlights flicker to life. She could almost hear her late husband's voice, calm and steady, reminding her of the dignity and patience, the quiet power of waiting for the right moment. She nodded softly to the empty room, as though he were there beside her. "I won't let her erase me," she whispered. "Not from Michael's life, not from my own." The shadows deepened around her, but Margaret's resolve only grew brighter. She had been betrayed, yes, but she had also been awakened. And somewhere in the days ahead, Vanessa would learn the cost of her deceit. There comes a moment when silence no longer feels like protection, but like surrender, and Margaret knew she had reached that line. The betrayal had stripped something from her, but in its place it left a sharper edge, a clarity she hadn't felt in years. She would not be erased. She would not allow her son's life to be rewritten without her. And Vanessa, smiling, deceitful Vanessa, was about to learn that a quiet woman could still roar. The days that followed were marked by a deliberate stillness. Margaret moved through her home as though nothing had changed, but beneath the surface she was calculating, piecing together each step of what would come. She gathered her strength in silence, her face calm whenever Michael's name came to mind, even as her heart ached. If he was blind to the truth, she would open his eyes. But she would not rush. Timing, she knew, was everything. She began collecting her proof. The credit card statement was the first piece, carefully tucked into a folder she kept hidden in her desk. Then came small details. Screenshots of Vanessa's social media posts flaunting the celebration she had been excluded from, smiling with friends, wine glasses raised. Margaret printed them, placing each one carefully behind the statement. They were tiny fragments, but together they built a picture Vanessa could not deny. At night, when the house was still, Margaret would sit at her kitchen table with a cup of tea cooling in her hands. She replayed the evening she had watched from across the street. The laughter, the balloons, the sight of her son clapping his hands as candles flickered. Each memory burned, but instead of weakening her, it hardened her resolve. The pain was fuel now. It whispered to her that she had endured worse storms and survived. This one, too, she would weather. When Michael finally called midweek, his voice sounded cheerful, distracted, almost guilty. "Hey, Mom, sorry I've been so busy," he said, his tone light. "Work's been crazy." Margaret's lips curved into a faint smile no one could see. She kept her voice steady, warm even. "I understand, Michael. I know how hard you work." She asked no questions, offered no accusation. Let him speak his excuses. Let him believe she was blind. It would make the truth all the more powerful when it finally surfaced. After the call ended, she sat in the silence, her heart aching but her mind resolute. She could not hate her son for what he did not yet see. The one who had stolen from her, lied to her, manipulated her family, was Vanessa. And Vanessa would learn that Margaret was not a woman to be dismissed. By Friday, Margaret had shaped her plan. She would not confront Vanessa in anger on the street, nor in whispers behind closed doors. No, she would bring the truth to light where it could not be twisted or hidden. Vanessa thrived on control, but Margaret would set the stage herself. She would invite them both to dinner, the kind of quiet family evening Vanessa would not suspect. And there, in the warmth of her own home, she would let the evidence speak. She imagined the moment clearly, Michael at her table, Vanessa across from her, the watch in its box beside her place. She would serve them dinner with steady hands, speak in calm tones, and when the time was right, she would open the drawer, lay out the statement, the photographs, the proof of every deception. Vanessa's mask would crack, and Michael would see. For the first time in days, Margaret allowed herself a breath that felt lighter. She was no longer trapped in confusion. She had a plan, and that gave her strength. As she stood at her window that evening, watching the last of the daylight fade, she whispered a promise to herself. "I won't be erased, not by her, not ever." The night stretched quiet around her, but inside she felt a storm building, one she no longer feared. She welcomed it, because when it broke, it would not wash her away. It would cleanse what had been poisoned, and it would remind her son of the truth. His mother's love had never faltered. Not once. This was no longer just about betrayal. It was about reclaiming her place, about showing Vanessa that even the sweetest lies crumble when faced with the weight of truth. And when that truth came to light, Margaret knew it would not just sting, it would shatter. Stay with me, because the night of that dinner would change everything. And if this story has your heart beating faster, if you feel the weight of Margaret's resolve as I do, make sure you keep listening, share it, and let others hear what happens when betrayal meets a mother's quiet strength. The table gleamed beneath the soft light of Margaret's dining room chandelier. She had polished the silver, laid out the china she seldom used, and folded the napkins into crisp triangles. Each gesture was deliberate, not just for beauty, but to cloak her purpose in the familiar comfort of family tradition. She wanted Michael to walk in and feel at home, to lower his guard. She wanted Vanessa to believe she still had the upper hand. The roast filled the air with its warm, savory scent, mingling with rosemary and garlic. Margaret worked steadily, her movements calm, her heart steady, though every beat echoed with anticipation. On the sideboard rested a small wooden box, the kind that might hold keepsakes or recipes. Inside, tucked between folded papers, was the truth she had gathered. The statement, the photographs, the receipts that told a story no lie could erase. When the doorbell rang, Margaret wiped her hands on her apron and opened the door with a smile. Michael stood there, handsome as always, though his eyes carried a tiredness that made her heart ache. Beside him, Vanessa radiated charm, her hand resting possessively on Michael's arm as though to remind the world he was hers. "Mom, the place smells amazing," Michael said warmly, stepping inside. He leaned down to kiss her cheek, his affection genuine, and for a moment the bitterness in her chest eased. Vanessa offered a bright smile. Margaret, you've outdone yourself. What a beautiful table. Margaret returned the smile, gracious but guarded. I thought we could use a quiet evening together, just a family. As they settled around the table, the clink of silverware and low hum of conversation filled the room. Margaret kept her tone light, asking Michael about his work, nodding at his stories, laughing softly at moments that called for it. She never let her gaze linger too long on Vanessa, though every word from her daughter-in-law felt calculated, every glance measured. Vanessa spoke of her latest projects, her friends, the small luxuries of her days. She painted herself as indispensable, the center of Michael's world, while Margaret listened with polite interest, her eyes steady, her thoughts hidden. She wondered if Vanessa sensed the undercurrent at the table, the subtle shift in power she could not yet see. Halfway through the meal, Michael's laughter filled the room, rich and warm. Margaret let herself bask in it, if only for a heartbeat. This was what she had missed most, the easy joy of her son's company. But even in that moment, she knew the shadow lingered, the truth pressing at the edges of their fragile peace. As the plates emptied and wine glasses lowered, the rhythm of conversation slowed. Margaret rose gracefully, collecting dishes, and when she returned, she carried not dessert but the wooden box. She set it down beside her plate, her fingers resting lightly on the lid. Michael glanced at it curiously. "What's that, Mom?" Margaret's gaze softened as it met his. "Something I thought we should talk about tonight." Vanessa's smile faltered just slightly before she caught herself. "Margaret, you always have such interesting surprises," she said with forced lightness. Margaret drew a slow breath. "It's not a surprise. It's clarity." She lifted the lid and carefully removed the papers, laying them in a neat stack on the table. The room grew still, the air heavy with unspoken tension. Michael's brow furrowed. "Mom, what is this?" Her voice remained steady, though her heart pounded. "It's proof, Michael. Proof of things I think you deserve to know. I didn't want to believe it myself, but I can't stay silent anymore." Vanessa's hand tightened on her wine glass, her nails pressing against the stem. "Margaret, I'm not sure what you think you're doing." "Enough," Margaret said softly, but with a finality that silenced the room. She slid the statement toward Michael, then the photographs. Each one landed with the quiet weight of truth. "Look, see for yourself." Michael hesitated, his eyes darting between his mother and his wife. He picked up the top sheet, scanning the numbers, the charges, the dates. His expression shifted, first confusion, then disbelief, and finally a flicker of something sharper. Vanessa leaned forward quickly. "Michael, it's not what it looks like. You know how things can be twisted." But Margaret interrupted, her voice calm, resolute. "These are not my words, Vanessa. They are facts, documents, your own posts. I'm not here to twist anything. I'm here because I will not be erased from my son's life with lies." The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Michael lowered the paper slowly, his jaw tight, his hands trembling slightly. For the first time that evening, Vanessa's smile failed her completely. The dinner Margaret had planned was no longer about food or warmth. It had become a reckoning. And in the quiet weight of the moment, she knew the storm she had carried within her had finally found its voice. Michael sat frozen, his eyes darting across the papers again and again, as though a second glance might rewrite the truth. His fork lay abandoned on his plate, the untouched food now nothing more than a prop in the silent theater unfolding around them. Vanessa leaned forward, her voice sweet but urgent. "Michael, listen to me. This, this is an ambush. Your mother is twisting things. You know how people can make anything look bad when they want to." Margaret didn't move, didn't flinch. She had expected the denial, the deflection. She simply watched her son, willing him to see, to feel the truth that stood between them on the polished table. Michael's hands shook slightly as he set down the last page. His face was pale, his jaw clenched tight. "Vanessa," he said slowly, his voice low and edged with a sharpness Margaret hadn't heard in years. "Tell me this isn't real." Vanessa reached across the table, her manicured fingers brushing his sleeve. "Of course it isn't real. Don't let her poison us like this. She's always been against me. She doesn't want me in your life, Michael. She never has." The words stung, but Margaret refused to let them pierce deeper than they already had. She leaned forward slightly, her voice calm yet unyielding. This isn't about wanting or not wanting you, Vanessa. It's about honesty, about the kind of life my son deserves. Michael's gaze swung to his mother, a flicker of pain in his eyes. Why now, Mom? Why bring this to me like this? Margaret's throat tightened. Because for too long I let silence shield lies. Because you are my son, and I will not stand by while you're deceived. If that costs me peace with you, then so be it. But at least I'll know I told you the truth. Vanessa's face hardened, the mask of charm slipping away. This is manipulation, Michael. Can't you see it? She's threatened by me, jealous even. She'll dig up anything to make you doubt me. The words spilled quickly, too quickly, and Margaret saw Michael notice it too. He leaned back, his eyes narrowing. Jealous? Of what? His tone was sharp now, demanding, a side of him Vanessa clearly hadn't anticipated. She faltered, then forced a laugh. Of the time we spend together, the life we're building. Some mothers just can't let go. Margaret's eyes glistened, but her voice remained steady. Letting go is one thing. Watching you be isolated, cut off from family, lied to, that's another. I will let go when it is time, Michael, but not when it means losing you to falsehoods. The silence that followed was heavy, pressing. Michael's hand moved through his hair, tugging at it in frustration. He looked torn, caught between the woman he married and the mother who raised him. Finally he spoke, his voice strained. I need to think. I need space. Vanessa's face paled. Michael. But he stood, his chair scraping against the floor. Don't. Not right now. His eyes flicked to Margaret, then back to Vanessa. I'm going for a drive. Margaret rose slowly, her hand reaching as though to touch his arm, but she stopped herself. Be safe, son, she whispered. The door closed behind him with a hollow thud, leaving only the echo of his absence. Vanessa turned sharply toward Margaret, her voice low and venomous now that Michael was gone. You think you've won, don't you? You think a few papers and some old photographs are enough to break us? Margaret met her glare with quiet strength. I don't need to win, Vanessa. The truth doesn't need me to fight for it. It stands on its own. For the first time, Vanessa's confidence cracked. Her eyes narrowed, but her hands trembled as she gripped her glass. She raised it, but before taking a sip, she whispered, almost to herself, He'll come back to me. He always does. Margaret didn't answer. She simply sat in the silence of her dining room, the candles flickering low, the ball of truth still open on the table. The night had split everything wide open, and nothing could be put neatly back again. What Margaret didn't know was that Michael, sitting in his car just down the street, had turned the ignition but hadn't driven away. His hands gripped the wheel, his mind a storm of memories, doubts, and the undeniable pull of the truth he had just seen with his own eyes. Michael returned hours later, though to Margaret it felt like days. The house had grown unbearably still in his absence, every tick of the clock marking the weight of uncertainty pressing on her chest. She sat in the same chair, unwilling to leave, unable to rest until she knew what choice her son would make. The front door creaked open, the sound cutting through the silence like a blade. Margaret looked up. Michael stepped inside, shoulders heavy, face drawn. His eyes, once bright with certainty, now held the storm of a man torn in two. Vanessa, who had been pacing restlessly, rushed forward. Michael, thank God you're back. I was so worried. Please, let's just put this all behind us. We can burn those papers. Forget the poison your mother has tried to spread. Her words spilled quickly, desperate and rehearsed. But Michael didn't reach for her. He removed his coat slowly, his movements deliberate, as though each gesture carried the weight of decision. Sit, he said quietly. His tone left no room for argument. Vanessa hesitated but obeyed, perching on the edge of the sofa. Margaret remained at the table, her hands folded, her heart pounding so hard she feared both of them could hear it. Michael began to speak, his voice measured, as though he had rehearsed each word during the long hours in the car. I've been thinking about the lies, the isolation, the canceled celebrations, the things I brushed aside because love makes you blind. And I realized truth doesn't need excuses. Lies always do. Vanessa shifted, her eyes darting nervously. Michael, I love you. Everything I've done, even the things that might look questionable, I did for us. To protect what we have. Michael's gaze hardened. Protect us? By cutting me off from my own mother? By making me believe her love was something toxic I needed to escape? That isn't protection, Vanessa. That's control. The word struck her like a slap. She recoiled, her voice rising. You're letting her turn you against me. She's manipulating you, Michael. Can't you see this is exactly what she wanted? Your doubt, your anger directed at me. Margaret wanted to speak, to defend herself, but she knew the moment belonged to Michael. She remained silent, her eyes fixed on him, praying he would see the truth that had always been there, waiting. He took a deep breath, his voice trembling now. Do you know what hurt me most? Not the lies themselves, but the realization that I was the last to know. That while everyone else could see the cracks, I was too busy defending you to notice the house was falling down around us. Vanessa's eyes brimmed with tears, but they glistened like weapons rather than wounds. She reached for his hand. Michael, please, I can change. We can start fresh. Don't let her ruin this. He pulled his hand away, the gesture final, unyielding. This isn't about starting over, Vanessa. This is about facing what's already been done. And I can't unsee the truth. Not anymore. The silence that followed was thick with finality. Vanessa's tears fell freely now, but there was no softness in them, no redemption. They were the tears of a woman who realized her hold was slipping, and nothing she said could pull him back. Michael turned then, his eyes finding his mother's. For a moment, Margaret saw the boy she had raised, the boy who once ran to her with scraped knees and boundless trust. His face softened, though his pain was still etched deep. Mom, he whispered, his voice breaking, I'm sorry for shutting you out. For believing you wanted to harm what I had when all you ever wanted was to protect me. Margaret's vision blurred with tears. She stood, crossing the room slowly, each step carrying years of love and longing. When she reached him, she placed her hand gently on his cheek, as though he might shatter if touched too roughly. There's nothing to forgive, son. You're here, that's enough. Vanessa rose suddenly, her chair scraping back in protest. So that's it? You'll just walk away from me because she waved some papers in your face after everything we've been through? Michael turned towards her, his voice steady but heavy with sorrow. I'm not walking away because of her, Vanessa. I'm walking away because of you. The words hung in the air, final and irrevocable. Vanessa stared at him, her mouth open but no words coming out, her power unraveling before their eyes. Michael looked back at his mother, and for the first time in years, Margaret felt the fragile thread of hope pulling taut between them, no longer severed but slowly mending. She held his gaze, her heart both breaking and healing at once. In that moment, the house was silent, stripped of lies, heavy with truth. And though the future was uncertain, Margaret knew one thing with absolute clarity. Her son had finally seen. The days that followed were unlike any Margaret had lived in years. For so long, her house had echoed with loneliness. But now Michael visited often, sometimes in silence, sometimes in tears, sometimes in halting words that carried the weight of regret. Each visit stitched a fragile patch into the torn fabric of their bond. Vanessa, meanwhile, withdrew into shadows. Though she remained under the same roof as Michael, the walls between them had grown thicker than stone. She moved with sharp, brittle motions, her smile gone, her voice edged with bitterness. Her once unshakable hold had slipped, and in its absence she seemed smaller, diminished, as though her power had always depended on deception. One evening, Michael sat at the kitchen table where years ago he had once done his homework, the same table where Margaret had spent countless nights praying for him in his absence. He traced a groove in the wood with his finger before speaking. I don't know what happens next, Mom, he admitted quietly. I thought I had built a life with her, but now it feels like the foundation was nothing but sand, and I don't even recognize myself when I look back. Margaret placed a gentle hand over his. You don't have to know everything right now. Healing isn't a straight road. It bends, it stumbles, it doubles back. What matters is that you see the truth now. That's the first step forward. Michael nodded, but his eyes were clouded. I wasted years, he whispered. Her heart clenched at the self-blame in his tone. No, son, you lived years. They were yours, even in pain. And now you have the chance to live differently. Don't call that waste. Call it the price of wisdom. His eyes lifted to hers then, glistening with tears. In them, she saw the boy she once rocked to sleep, the man he had become, and the wounded soul caught between. She squeezed his hand, silently promising that no matter how broken he felt, she would stand beside him until his strength returned. The confrontation with Vanessa had left cracks in their marriage that no amount of pleading or apology could mend. Michael began sleeping on the couch, then in the spare room, until at last one morning he packed a small suitcase. He didn't announce it, didn't slam doors or shout accusations. He simply walked out, carrying only what was necessary, leaving behind a house full of things but empty of love. Margaret was waiting for him. She opened her door as he approached, suitcase in hand, face pale but resolved. Without words, she stepped aside, and he entered the home that had always been his, no matter how far he had strayed. For the first time in years, Margaret felt peace stir in the air. It was fragile, tender, but real. She made him tea, the same way she always had, and as he sat at the table sipping slowly, she saw his shoulders ease, as though some invisible weight had finally been set down. The weeks blurred into a rhythm of quiet healing. Some days he spoke of memories, birthdays, laughter, moments Vanessa had stolen from them. Other days he said nothing, retreating into thought. But his presence itself was enough. Margaret didn't push. She simply offered love in the small ways that had always defined her. A warm meal, a patient ear, a steady hand. Then one evening, as the sun sank low and painted the kitchen in amber light, Michael spoke words that anchored themselves in her heart. "You never stopped being my mother," he said softly. "Even when I shut you out, even when I believed her over you, you never gave up on me. I see that now, and I'm sorry it took me so long." Tears welled in her eyes, spilling freely before she could stop them. She reached for him, holding him as she had when he was a child. "Love doesn't keep score, Michael. It only waits, and I would have waited forever." His arms wrapped around her, strong and trembling all at once. In that embrace, the years of silence, the canceled birthdays, the nights of loneliness, all of it dissolved. What remained was the unbreakable truth of blood, of love, of the bond no lie could erase. Vanessa would fade into the past, a ghost of manipulation and fractured trust. Her name would be spoken less and less until it no longer held power over them. What endured was something greater, the rebirth of a son's love for his mother and the quiet triumph of truth over deceit. That night, Margaret sat by the window long after Michael had gone to bed. The stars glimmered above, steady and eternal. She breathed deeply, her heart full, her soul finally at rest. The road ahead would not be simple. There would be paperwork, difficult conversations, perhaps even courtrooms. But none of it mattered as much as this. Her son had come home, not just to her house, but to himself. For Margaret, that was victory enough.